Hi, everybody. My name is Casey Walford. I'm the confidential advocate with RVSP, and I'm going to get this presentation started in just a couple moments or a couple minutes. So right at 3, I do want to disclose in advance that I will be recording this presentation so that it is available on our Facebook later. And we have also been working on putting together a YouTube channel, which I'm super excited about, so that people can access our presentations in the future if they are ever interested. So if y'all ever have any presentation requests or ideas, definitely let us know. We are so interested in hearing from you. We do these presentations for our students, and so we want to know what students are wanting to talk about. So y'all definitely let us know, and we'll get started in just a couple moments. So look forward to it. All right, so we are right at 3 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So today for our How to Be a Decent Human Being series, we are going to be talking about why it's so important to feel your freaking feelings and the importance of being able to recognize your feelings, recognize your emotions so that you can communicate them as well. One of the reasons I find this to be so important when we're talking about the Relationship Violence and Sexual Assault Prevention Program, when we're talking about prevention of violence within relationships, it's important to realize a lot of prevention can be done in terms of those smaller forms of violence. So like the language that we use against others, or even let's say that somebody is gossiping about someone behind somebody else's back. A lot of the ways that we can reduce those forms of violence is really by being in touch with what we're feeling, being in touch with what other people are feeling so that we can be responsive to ourselves and others in those moments, and we can address things from the get-go, address the root causes of certain behaviors. And if we do that, if we address feelings, if we regulate our feelings, if we recognize our feelings, then we are so able to prevent maybe those smaller scale forms of violence. And so that's why this is so important to this movement. And overall, by understanding your feelings, you can just live an overall better quality of life and have better quality of relationships. This image here is a feeling wheel that I often like to give to students when they come into the office. I've had plenty of students who will come in and they will say things like, I don't have feelings. I just don't have feelings. And I always find that so interesting. And a lot of times when they say, I don't have feelings, it's not that they're actually not experiencing them. We all are constantly experiencing feelings all the time. It's continuous. But it's the fact that they haven't been able, or they didn't grow up in an environment that nurtured them to be able to label those feelings. So I like to provide this wheel. It's available through Google. If you literally just Google like feeling wheel or emotion wheel, you can see it come up. And I want to point out just from the get-go, you know, in our culture, we ask people all of the time, how are you feeling? How do you feel? Or some variation or form of that question. And thinking about that, if you truly think about it, when you ask others, one, do you expect for them to respond honestly? Do you expect them to respond with how they are actually feeling? when you are asked, do you respond with how you're actually feeling? Or do you usually respond with some form of variation of good, fine, okay, meh, like something that kind of shrugs off the question almost? Because you would think in a culture that we're asking each other all the time, how are you feeling? That our feelings would matter to us, that other people's feelings would matter to them. And we often see feelings being under prioritized and not talked about enough within our culture in different social settings. So today's presentation, it really comes from, I read this book back at the beginning of quarantine. It's called Permission to Feel. It's by Mark Brackett, who's the director for the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And this book was so powerful. Today, some of the things I've pulled to talk about are really only from the first couple chapters because it's such a good book. I could talk about feelings like over and over and just how important it is. But one of the things that Mark Brackett talks about in this book is at the beginning of his presentations, he'll often ask his audience, he'll say, right now, take a moment. I want you to think about 3 things that you're feeling. And he'll ask the audience to just sit with that. And when they are, then he'll like go around, ask if anybody wants to share. Oftentimes there's a lot of hesitancy with the sharing. And then when somebody does, oftentimes he'll say that usually he only gets people to share about 1 feeling word. So even though people might think that they've thought of 3 feeling words, someone might say, oh, I'm doing good, a little overwhelmed, just fine. And it's like there's really only 1 feeling word within that. And the uncomfortableness of talking about feelings in front of other people also just says a lot about our society and how our society does in making it safe and comfortable for people to talk about their emotions. And so it says a lot that we really aren't very comfortable talking about our emotional lives with strangers, with different communities that we're really unaware of or unfamiliar with. And yes, that's kind of a setting that's abnormal, but even within our own relationships, a lot of times I often see that students who come into my office are also uncomfortable addressing their feelings directly with their partner or their roommate or their family. So their feelings kind of get swept under the rug or just not acknowledged. And somebody can absolutely love someone can care about somebody, but that doesn't mean that that person is actually truly seen by that person. To have your needs met, you have to be truly seen by another individual. In order to be truly seen by somebody, you have to be able to know what you're feeling and recognize your own feelings. And it is a skill that has to be worked on. It's just like any other muscle that we exercise. Identifying your feelings is a practice that you have to keep doing in order to really recognize what's going on with you. So about me, I already said I'm the confidential advocate with RVSP. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white cisgender heterosexual woman. And in terms of the movement to end sexual violence and relationship violence, I formally entered this movement in 2015. And so I have worked with a lot of different survivors, victims, however they identify, whether that's because of sexual assault or because of relationship violence. And so I have seen a lot of people, you know, even in terms of their healing when they're moving forward, exploring new relationships, and a lot of feelings come up. And so identifying feelings and being able to communicate those with others is definitely a part of the healing process. I also like to really run with the identity of a bad advocate is part of my identity, which does not mean I'm not good at what I do. I am good at what I do. I'm very good at supporting survivors overall. You know, of course, I'd like to think feedback has been good. But bad advocate is really embracing this idea that I am always in the process of unlearning, former things that have been just deeply embedded within me, like any internalized oppression, and I am constantly learning and trying to create a better culture, a more nonviolent culture. And that's a lot of part of where this How to Be a Decent Human Being series came from, was noticing that when I'm asked to give presentations, I'm not able to nearly cover as much as I would love to. There's just so many different topics and things that as a culture we can be talking about to shift towards a nonviolent culture. And part of that is this permission to feel, is feeling your feelings and that being okay. And so that is where this series came from. And if y'all ever have anything that you want to talk about, definitely let me know. So today's objectives, I'm obviously going to talk about what our services are with RBSP, make sure y'all are aware of those, understand how the inability to effectively deal with emotions has impacted our culture. We're going to define what's the difference between an emotion, a feeling, and a mood, and understand how emotions impact our relationships. And then we are going to dive into kind of how to recognize our emotions. What are some basic fundamental things y'all can be doing to learn how to identify your emotions and how that can be helpful. So again, this is kind of going to be a 101, just like a small dive into permission to feel, what feelings are. That being said, I hope to in the future continue to build on this presentation because there's just so much that we can talk about when we are talking about giving ourselves permission to feel our freaking feels, because they are valid. In terms of RBSP, so we provide education. This is an example. When we've been on campus in the past, we've had Taco Tuesdays to get together. We've even in a virtual world, we've hosted Netflix watch parties, and we just continue to figure out how can we provide education. Again, not because just supporting survivors after someone has been sexually assaulted or people in relationships after they've experienced violence within their relationships, that's not enough. We also want to really be focused on education so we can focus on prevention. And then support and advocacy go hand in hand. In terms of support, I know it's the end of the semester. One of the things and the services that we provide is academic accommodations. If you are struggling at all this semester and it is due to relationship violence or sexual violence, definitely reach out, let us know. We work with professors very consistently, trying to see if we can provide accommodations. We always try to get people linked into and registered with the STAR Center, which is a really great resource. If you are nervous about violence that you might experience or have experienced while being home, if you moved off campus at Thanksgiving and then you've started to experience violence at home, reach out because we have access to emergency housing. We also are always safety planning, making sure that people have access to their medical needs or STI screening or testing. And we always are talking about exploring options in terms of reporting, if that's ever something someone is interested in. And advocacy, I think advocacy also goes hand in hand with education as well, really. So advocacy, not only when someone's in the office with me or on the phone with me, or I'm talking to them over Teams, is that when I'm going to be supporting them. I'm also focused on keeping up with policies, public policies that impact survivors and victims, the importance of voting so that we can have leaders in positions that can make decisions that are going to benefit survivors. Advocacy is really understanding that to end all forms of violence, to end sexual violence, we must end all forms of violence. So we cannot just focus on sexual violence. We also have to be thinking about racism, ableism, classism, heterosexism. And that's, again, another purpose for this series, is so that we can spend more time understanding the intersectionality between sexual violence and all other forms of violence. So why? Again, why are we focusing on feelings? So one of the big things is that in a relationship, in order for it to be successful, again, whether it's an intimate relationship or a roommate situation, just a platonic friendship, you've been best friend for years, you have to be able to communicate your feelings and communicate your needs, right? If you do not, like, let's say if you are sad, if you are upset, if you are disappointed, and somebody else has done something to impact you in a way that makes you feel that way, in order to prevent it from happening again, or in order to reduce the impact that that has negatively on a relationship, you have to be able to say, like, hey, I'm really upset about this. I'm really disappointed in this. This is the reason why. This is what I need from you so that we can have a better relationship in the future. So we have to be able to communicate what we are feeling. We also have to understand that the goal of life is not to just be perpetually happy. I think anybody who has been on this earth for years or even days, though they might not be aware of it, right? I mean, I guess we hear babies cry, pretty instantaneously if their needs aren't being met, right? They are upset. We are never going to be perpetually happy. And if somebody is perpetually happy, then I am very skeptical of it because that's just not realistic, right? So the goal in our lives should not be that we will always be happy. It should be to be able to recognize the complexity of all of our emotions. When we are able to identify our emotions, then we can understand how life is impacting us. We can understand what is adding positive values to our life, what is adding happiness, what's adding joy, and we can understand what is making us upset or sad. But we have to be able to identify all those emotions in order to address the inputs in our life, right? If we have somebody in our life who is extremely toxic, but we are unable to identify that they are causing us emotional pain, then we might not see them as toxic. We might not be able to understand, hey, this input in my life is really taking a negative toll on me. And so the goal is not to avoid all hardships. I think a lot of times, even when we think about parents want to protect their children. People want to protect themselves. They really want to do everything that they can, of course, to mitigate their risk to experience hardship. I think that's a very acceptable, reasonable goal. But there's so many things in life that we really cannot plan for, right? I think 2020 is a really great example of that. There's no way that we could have predicted that COVID-19 was going to result in shelter in place and then was going to result in loved ones we know getting sick and then worrying about them and unexpected losses of loved ones or of a social life or of a sense of normalcy. There's no way that we could have predicted that. And that's how life works in a lot of ways. We just can't predict everything that's going to happen. As much as we want to be in control, we have things that we absolutely can control, but then there's so many things that are out of our hands that we can't. So again, the goal isn't to avoid all hardship. The goal isn't to be consistently like happy and going about our lives like, yeah, everything's great when it's a dumpster fire. The goal is to acknowledge like, hey, the dumpster is on fire. This sucks right now. And I'm really upset. I'm feeling really lonely. We need to be able to acknowledge those things so that we can get the support that we need. Of course, I already kind of addressed this, but to heal from sexual and relationship violence, again, it's going to be really important to acknowledge feelings that you experience afterwards and the psychological impact of those events so that you can work through them. Emotions and feelings you have to go through. There's no way around them, right? You cannot ignore it or suppress it. If you do, oftentimes by ignoring or suppressing an emotion, it's actually going to give that emotion more power and more control over your life, even though you think that you're doing the opposite. And I like this quote from Mark Brackett. Hurt feelings don't vanish on their own. They don't heal themselves. If we don't express our emotions, they pile up like a debt that will eventually come due. And I just so agree with this. Again, you can't just ignore something and think it will go away. It that's just not how life works. So the quicker that you're able to acknowledge emotions in your life, then the quicker you can address it, the quicker you can get your needs met. And I pulled this quote from the Unlocking Us podcast with Brene Brown, which is actually where I saw this book for the first time and decided to order it and read it. And it was really great. So I recommend it to anybody, and the podcast as well is really, really helpful. And emotions determine whether academic content will be processed. I think it's just so relevant to talk about emotions when we're talking about students, right? Y'all are in class all the time, whether it's virtually or in person now. And when you're in class, your emotional state impacts whether you're going to be able to absorb content, really take it in, or if it's just honestly a waste of your time in a lot of ways. I mean, if you are completely checked out, if you're bored, if you're daydreaming of what's going on the weekend, are you really taking in that information? If you are excited to be there, excited about the topic, ready to learn, super high energy, super engaged, yes, you are going to retain that information more. I know when I am put in an experience in the classroom that helps me have an emotional connection to the material as well, I'm much more likely to retain that information and understand it than if I'm listening. Even like in this situation, right? If you are listening, if you're interested in the topic, if you have energy, much easier to retain. If you just like put this on because you were scrolling in the background and just came across it, but you're just not that engaged and low energy, also ready for a nap, you're probably just not going to retain the information as much as someone else. And I think it's important to understand that our culture has a really difficult time processing emotions and acknowledging emotions. Our culture does a really good job of not creating a place to learn about emotions, right? We learn about cursive, well, maybe not. Maybe that's a horrible example, but we learn about, math from a young age. We do learn about, okay, that rule, treat others the way that you want to be treated, those things, but that doesn't actually teach us about emotions. It doesn't give us clues or skills of how to identify our own emotions. And when we aren't giving people those skills to identify their emotions, then we are setting them up for failure for emotional processing. And these were some statistics that I found interesting that I pulled from the book. American youth now rank in the bottom quarter among developed nations in well-being and life satisfaction, according to a report by UNICEF. And I think that's so important, right? When we are measuring success, some people turn to thinking about monetary gain. Some people turn to thinking about your position title within your career. Other people measure success as their grades. If they're making A's, if they're not, it's not even worth it to them. But really, when we think about the success in our lives, a lot of our quality of life is determined by the quality of our relationships. And the quality of our relationships is in a lot of ways tied directly to how are we able to connect with others. And our ability to connect with others depends a lot on our ability to recognize our own emotions and communicate those with others. The next statistic I saw that I thought was interesting is more than half of college students experience overwhelming anxiety, and a third report intense depression. And that's pretty consistent with what I see with people who I am working with. Obviously, students who are coming into our office or reaching out have experienced sexual or relationship violence. So anxiety and depression are very common to experience right after that, or even ongoing, depending on the severity of the abuse and the incident and how someone responded to a disclosure and the support that they're getting. But this statistic really stands out. I mean, there's so much that self-worth is tied to someone's productivity in our nation, which is a very capitalistic nation. We are money driven in a lot of ways. And that puts a lot of pressure on students, and that makes students have so much anxiety about exams. They often will think if I fail this exam, I'm not going to be able to reach my career goals. And that is not true. One, if you fail an exam, if you fail a course, I want you to know that you absolutely are still more than capable of achieving any goals that you set out for yourself, right? It might take adapting, it might take flexibility, but it's very possible still. Over the last 2 decades, there has been a 28% increase in our suicide rate. And that statistic really stood out to me. It's just a pretty devastating statistic when you think about it. And again, when we're talking about relationship violence, I think often it's easy to think about relationship violence as a relationship with somebody else being violent towards somebody else. But relationship violence is also your relationship with yourself, right? If you are speaking to yourself in a very negative way, if you are extremely depressed or sad or experiencing a mood disorder and not getting any support because you don't think that your emotions are valid, you don't think that your mood is valid, someone has told you that your mood is not valid, or they just have told you like snap out of it, then they clearly don't understand the chemicals in our brain as well. And there's still such a stigma around getting support, getting medication, seeing a psychiatrist. But, you know, when we think about someone who's physically injured, they go to the doctor so quickly. They have a broken leg, they're going to get a cast, they're going to make sure that, you know, things are in place to get that leg back to normal. But then when we think about mental health, that cannot be physically seen, there's such a stigma around going to the doctor for it and then getting medication that's doing the exact same thing as kind of a cast would do, like just helping create a sturdy place so that you can just heal and work and get back to healthy. And that's what's going on with mental health as well. Like a lot of medication is helping provide just that cast, that support for your neurotransmitters so that you can be seeing a counselor or seeing someone to talk about what you're going through, to again support you in getting through something. And there really should not be a stigma around getting support for your mental health, but that is the reality. And that is a big part of why we still see an increase in suicide rates. But if we shift to acknowledging our emotions and creating a culture where it's okay to speak about, hey, I'm depressed, I'm extremely sad, I've been sad for months, or I'm having a really tough week. If we create a culture where it's okay to acknowledge our emotions and talk about them to somebody else, then we can really create a safety net. We can start to create all these protective factors that can reduce suicide rates, reduce depression, reduce anxiety, and we can have much better life satisfaction and well-being. So talking about feelings, emotions, it's like, okay, what is that, right? When we talk about emotion, I think it's easy for people to name like some basic ones like happy, sad, angry. But then if you say, okay, well, what is an emotion? That's a harder question to answer. And so I wanted to take time to actually define those things. And an emotion arises from the appraisal of internal or external stimulus. It's often short-lived, and you can have more than one emotion at the same time. So I know even in Survivor Support Group, one of the things that we have done to process how somebody's emotionally feeling is when people come into Survivor Support Group, I'll have a wheel. It's like a circle, and it's broken into 8 different pie pieces, and I will put that feeling chart, the emotion chart that y'all saw at the beginning, I will put that on the table as well. And so people can look at that feeling chart and look at different things that they're experiencing right now. So you're really breaking down that pie into 8 different emotions that you have going on right in that moment, right? So you can have plenty of different things going on at the same time, right? Because we are complex human beings, so we can be excited about one thing, happy about one thing or one area in our lives, but also disappointed because we just had an argument with a friend. So we have a lot of emotions going on within us at once, a lot of emotions and feelings. And it's the appraisal of internal or external stimulus. So let's say jumping out of an airplane, right? So the appraisal of that external stimulus for some people would be excitement, happiness, but then the appraisal for other people could be fear, anxiety. And so it's what that means to you on an individual level, right? That's why when people, like, let's say two people are about to jump out of the airplane, one person's like, yeah, this is going to be great. I'm so excited. And then the other person is like, I'm so scared. I don't want to do this. Like, I'm freaking out. If the person who's excited turns to the other person and says, don't be scared. It's cool. Like, it's going to be great. Stop being scared. You have no reason to be scared. That is invalidating somebody's emotions. It's not going to take away the fear that that person is experiencing. So it's really important to understand an emotion is your personal appraisal to a situation, whether it's internal or external, and your feelings and emotions are always valid. So nobody can tell you that you should not feel that way. Absolutely. If you feel a certain way, you should feel that way. You are feeling that way. And someone trying to discredit that or tell you just stop feeling that way, that does not work. I think there's so many examples of our culture, especially when someone is sad or crying, people will be like, oh, stop crying. It's not that bad. People say it to children like all the time. Suck it up, stop crying. And that does not take away the sadness that that child or whoever, partner, teacher, friend, family member, that doesn't take away the emotion that they're experiencing in that moment. Instead, what that does is it gives a message. I see that you're experiencing this. I'm uncomfortable with it. I want you to stop. I am not somebody that you should be showing your emotions to. And children get these messages so often, specifically men. I know that I just gave a presentation on breaking the bro code. And when we look at men, it's around the ages of 5 or 6, like kindergarten, that men start to shun the idea of showing their emotions to others or fear it because they start to fear losing respect. And age 14, they definitely feel like if I show my emotions, I could potentially lose respect. And so it's just something to be aware of. A feeling is our internal response to an emotion. So while emotions are more short-lived, a feeling is a longer state of that emotion. So sometimes you see an overlap in feelings and emotions as words being used to describe how somebody is doing. So let's say emotion. Surprised is an emotion. I'm surprised, right? I walk into a room, it's my birthday, someone hosted a surprise party for me. I'm shocked. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Thanks so much. Or I'm like, this sucks. I was not ready for it. I'm upset that someone would do this to me who knew that I hated surprise parties. But an emotion is going to be short-lived, right? So I'm surprised, but I'm not going to be surprised for like an hour and a half. It's not going to be 2 days later and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just still so shocked. No, I'm not. That is still, you're moving into a feeling. A feeling is a little bit more ongoing. So think about if you're hanging out with someone that you have a crush on, they tell a joke, it makes you laugh, it makes you happy. So you're excited, humored. So you experience that emotion quickly, but the feeling that you're around them is more attached to that relationship, maybe more of the history. So the feeling can just be very much, I'm overall excited to be with this person. And that feeling will stay there, right? So it's not just that quick reaction, right? And if you have tons of emotions going in, like this person's really funny, and you're like laughing, humored, your feeling towards that person is going to grow in its positivity as well. Anger is an example of a feeling. It's also an example of emotion. Someone can be angry quickly. So let's say you're driving, someone cuts you off, you're angry, it's short, maybe you say a curse word, maybe you don't, maybe you honk, maybe you were told not to in Texas because everybody has guns, so you should never honk at anyone. That's the message that my parents gave me. But your anger resides like overall pretty quickly, but your feeling being stuck in traffic can be, I'm overall angry at the situation, right? It's ongoing. So someone cutting you off, quick anger, but that feeling, it can be, I'm frustrated, I'm stressed. It's more longer in duration. And it's a response to that anger or that hurt. I'm going to be late for my X and X event because I'm stuck in this freaking traffic. So there is a difference between emotions and feelings. So one way to distinguish emotions, short-lived, you can have more than one at once. Feelings are a little bit longer in duration. They're an internal response to our emotions. So think of like a culmination of the different emotions that you're experiencing. And a feeling, again, is longer lasting. And then a mood is a less intense feeling emotion, but it's way longer lasting. And so I think when people think about moods today, a lot of people think about mood disorders, so like anxiety or depression. So it's just like an underlying feeling that you have for even maybe a duration of months. And it just lasts longer, but it's not at the forefront, right? Anger can present itself very abruptly, very in your face, even sadness, right? You can see somebody sobbing. That's like they are extremely distressed, extremely sad, but that's not their mood. So if someone's sobbing, their mood would be depressed, potentially. And an emotion and a feeling really determines in the moment what you care about. So I kind of already alluded to this when talking about if you're in class and you're bored. If you are bored, what do you care about in that moment? Trying to think of anything else to escape with your mind. So thinking about weekend plans, thinking about that crush that you have, your mind can wander everywhere. If you are feeling scared, if you are frightened, then what do you care about in that moment, right? If I'm at home, I heard a noise that really freaked me out. I think someone might be trying to break in. What is all my attention going to be focused on in that moment? Survival, right? Or getting out of that situation. A lot, especially when we think about sexual assault or traumatic events, when people are scared, they are in survival mode. There's a sense of helplessness, hopelessness, and they are in survival. So they're not thinking about what I ate for dinner yesterday. They are potentially thinking, if their thinking brain is still online, how do I get out of this situation? And then our thinking and behavior change in response to what we're feeling. So we have a lot of mood congruency, which really just means if you are feeling really upset, if you're feeling really irritated or down, then everything going on around you, you are going to be registering all of the sadness way more than anything positive. So I think about it in terms of when you are just like in that really irritable, annoyed mode, when you're feeling irritable, everything around you starts to irritate you, right? Things that you usually have the patience to deal with or compassion and kindness to deal with, you are like, this sucks, you suck, you suck, you suck. You just start to notice like all of the horrible qualities about everyone around you. That's what you're picking up on rather than the goodness and kindness within them. If you are in a really happy mood, feeling very kind yourself, compassionate, empathetic, then you're also going to acknowledge all the great qualities of humanity around you. So even when you think about professors and when they're grading papers, right? If someone's evaluating you and they are in a good mood, they're going to be more likely to give you higher marks. If someone's evaluating you and they're in a bad mood, then they're going to be more likely to be really critical about what they're evaluating. And so that's something really that professors should be considering when they are grading papers, if it's subjective, right? If you're grading papers and you just watched, I'm just trying to think of a show. I don't know. The first show that came to mind is It's On Us. Got a lot of emotional ups and downs, right? So if you just watched an episode, it ended, and you're feeling really great about it, really happy, and then you're like grading the papers right after that, going to be less critical. If you just watched an episode and it was a tearjerker and it made you really upset and you were just sobbing like 3 minutes ago at what the cliffhanger was, you're going to be more critical of that paper. And so that's something that even professors should be aware of. They should be trying to be in the same mood when grading, which I know is not always possible, but it's something to be aware of. And this is an exercise that I have done in the past that I think is something really helpful. Again, have done it in survivor support group. With relationships, it's really helpful to think about what emotions you feel in each of your relationships. So when you think of a certain person, when they come to mind, think of how you feel when you interact with them. So I usually ask people to think of every single person that they interact with during a day and then go through some of these questions. So how do you feel when you encounter them? How do you feel even before you see them? Like how much do you look forward to interacting with them? Do you dread it? Do you fear it? Do you have anxiety about it? Does it stress you out? Or are you excited? Are you like elated when you see them? Do you smile every time you're with them, every time you hear their voice? And then do you feel emotionally neutral, right? Does this person not really bring up a lot for you? Are you just kind of apathetic about it? Or do you tense up? So I ask people to even think about, okay, like what is going on with your body? Where are you feeling tension? Do you feel the smile come to your face? So really thinking about how your body is reacting to the idea of even seeing them. And then I ask everybody to just choose one word, one feeling word to associate with that person. And when you go through that and when you think about your list, then you can also start to think about how much time do people who bring me positive feelings, how much time do they get in my life versus people who I associated negative feelings with. And sometimes that can be really helpful. Again, you're looking at what's the input in your life. You're looking at where am I also using my energy? How am I expending my energy in terms of who I'm hanging out with? Is it bringing me more positivity or is it bringing me more negativity? And when you do that, you can visually see, you have it written down on paper in front of you, who could you benefit from spending more time with, and who could you benefit from either strengthening that relationship by like, okay, you decide that they stress you out. How do you communicate with them? How do you better that relationship? Or do you decide to try to cut them out a little bit more if that's possible, right? If it's a work setting, maybe it's not as possible, but a lot of reasons why people leave their jobs, unfortunately, is because they don't have a good relationship with their boss. So I think jobs is a big thing when we think about feelings as well, because in the job market, you know, we have so much technology these days. It's pretty easy to automate different services, but something that you can never automate, that will never be a robotic thing, is positive feelings from genuine emotional connection. And people want people at their companies that are going to create a culture where feelings are respected, people feel valued, people feel truly seen. Therefore, their company can be more successful because people are motivated to perform at higher rates. And so when we think about feelings, a lot of times people will be like, oh, this topic is just like so feel goody, like, oh my gosh, feelings. But it's like it impacts work performance as well. And thinking about emotions within relationships as well, we are always constantly giving people messages of whether they should approach us or avoid us. And sometimes we are sending out the wrong signals as well. Like maybe it's not our intention to be pushing people away, but we are, because we are showing negative emotions, right? So even I used this example earlier, but when someone's crying, sometimes other people don't want to approach them because they're scared. They're just like not ready to take on someone's emotional negative energy. But maybe exactly what that person needs at someone is someone to approach them and come up to them. Sometimes maybe someone slams a door, they're pissed, a kid goes to their room, they just got in an argument. Doesn't really send off the message that they want someone to approach them, but oftentimes they really do. They want someone to say, okay, like I see that you're so angry. what is going on? How can I support you? How can I make it better? Or I see that you're really sad. What can I do to support you? So it's really important to understand the emotions that we're showing and portraying will have an impact on our relationships at all times. When we show positive emotions, when we show up, when we're smiling, we are a lot more approachable. People want to come up, they want to spend their energy with you because they see your positive emotions and they want to experience that vicarious joy from you. They want, a lot of times people are like, happiness is contagious, feelings are contagious, smiles are contagious, and people want to be around good vibes, right? People want to follow the good vibes. And so it's important to realize at every single moment we are sending out signals of whether other people want to approach us or avoid us. And it's important that we be able to recognize what messages that we're sending out so that we are getting the response that we actually desire and that we need. And we also express our emotions in order to get what we want from other people, right? So if we want somebody to approach us, we smile. I know even for myself, if I am walking down the street, if I'm in a mood to have conversations, if I'm in an elevator with somebody, if I want to have a conversation, I will smile at them, give them eye contact. I will seem really friendly. But if I'm in an elevator and I don't want to talk to somebody at all, I will look down, just be like on my phone even. Like we are constantly giving out signals of whether to approach us or interact with us or not. And I just put this quote on here because I really like it. Emotional sickness is avoiding reality at any cost, and emotional health is facing reality at any cost, right? So it really circles back to so important to recognize your own emotions, right? The goal is not perpetual happiness. The goal is not, I'm never going to experience hardship. The goal is acknowledging your emotions at any cost so that you can actually confront them, deal with them head on, and move through them. And so to recognize your emotions, a professor at Boston College came up with this mood meter. And I think it is so helpful. It's in this book, like at the very beginning. When I got this book, I was living with my parents because of COVID-19. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, look, you can like look at all the different moods and it's so exciting. And it really is. And this mood meter is really broken down by two different things that this professor thought really drive your emotion. Like they're the core drivers of emotions. And that is how you're feeling in terms of pleasantness and then how you're feeling in terms of your energy level. And so he broke down this mood meter into 4 different quadrants. So the top right quadrant that you see here, high energy, high pleasantness. This is going to be someone who's like ready to take on the day. They're probably going to be sitting upright, just looking like bright-eyed, just the person that you think of when they're like, I'm ready, I'm a go-getter, let's do this. Just like very hyped up about the day and really exuding that. Then you have someone who's high pleasantness but lower energy. So they're still going to have a smile on their face, but maybe not seem as approachable. They're going to seem like this more content person, just going about their day, feeling good about everything, but they're not going to be as in your face about, yeah, like, let's do this. It's just going to seem a little bit more subdued. And then you also have low pleasantness, low energy, which is this bottom left quadrant. So that is going to be someone that is probably looking down, not making a lot of eye contact. That's the person on the elevator that is like, I don't really want to talk. They're going to come off as maybe an Eeyore type, just like pretty down in the dumps and depressed, feeling blue. And then you have someone who is higher energy, but still low pleasantness, this top left quadrant. That's the person that you're going to know is not happy. So they might be feeling a lot of pain and a lot of hurt, but they're not keeping it as to themselves. You are very aware that they are not happy. So here you're going to see a lot more anger and frustration, and it's just going to be emoted and a lot more transparent because they have the energy to express their frustration. And so when you think about someone's mood, when you think about how they're feeling, it's really, really helpful to use a chart like this or use the wheel that I showed at the beginning to start to be able to label your emotions, right? I think even throughout this presentation, I've kind of gone back to a lot of the same emotion words like happy, sad, angry, frustrated, stressed, anxious. And I am constantly still trying to work on building my own emotional vocabulary. Even when I'm working with students, you can say, oh, I heard you say this. It sounds like you're upset. And sometimes students are like, no, that's not it, right? And it's because upset might be in the right quadrant here, but it doesn't reflect the extent to either their energy level or their pleasantness, or it doesn't nail it. And so the more that we are able to buff up our emotional vocabulary, the more that we're able to describe it, the better that helps us communicate to others exactly what we're feeling and what we need so that we can address it and move forward. And I think it's important to know, so obviously emotional vocabulary can help us identify and label our own emotions so that we can take power over them versus them having power over us. It also helps us communicate our emotions verbally, but a lot of our communication is definitely done in a very non-verbal way. Or somebody can say, I'm feeling happy, like I'm good. They won't say happy, they'll say I'm good. But then you see their body language, they're looking down, they have their arms crossed. You can see sadness, or you can see disgust or anger. So you know, like, no, this is not matching up. And so research has really shown that we show 6 basic emotions with our facial expressions, and those are disgust, anger, sadness, desire, happiness. Oh my gosh, I put sadness on there twice. The last one is surprise. My bad, I will change that. And those are expressed differently. And even when we think about different cultures are going to express those emotions differently. So it's really important to realize, even if you think you have an idea of what disgust looks like when someone shows it. So like, let's say somebody farts, we often make a disgust face, or like, we might try not to, but we're still just like, oh, it smells bad. We have all different facial expressions. So my version of disgust is not going to look exactly like somebody else's. And so we often think we can assume how somebody is feeling based on maybe their facial expressions, but it's still important to then check in with them. Hey, like, I just noticed, you just seem kind of down. Am I getting it right? Right? It's always important, if you're trying to define or label someone else's emotion, to not assume that you are correct, because you might not be. And a lot of times, I thought it was so interesting, Mark Brackett also spoke to, he'll stand in front of an audience and ask people, he'll like show a bunch of pictures of different faces, and he'll ask people like, what is this person feeling? What is this person feeling? And he'll get lots of different answers, right? And so I think that goes to show that people are not on the same page with identifying other people's emotions. Again, it's a skill, and a skill that we are often not taught. So he'll show the same picture, and one person will say, oh, that person's sad. The other person will say that person's angry. So we are not skilled as a culture in identifying other people's emotions. So that's why it's so important that we're able to communicate with them. I use this example, so I show this face because Mark Brackett said that one of the things he'll do when people are like, I 100% know what that person's feeling if I just see a picture. One of the things he'll do is he'll then turn around and he'll reface the audience and say, okay, I'm making a face, and he'll kind of look like this person, just like a blank palette almost. And he'll say, what am I feeling? And again, get so many different responses. And so again, we can't know what someone is feeling just by looking at them. Again, maybe someone's sending off avoid signals. Maybe they're like, don't come near me. But the last thing that they want is someone to not actually ask them how they are. So again, we really need to be using our communication to understand what someone's feeling. So I've given like a lot of different information today, and this is just such a shallow dive into what emotions are and how they impact our lives. This is dipping the toe in the water, right? There's just so much to learn about emotions. I talked about nonverbal communication, but another form of understanding someone's emotions is even the tone of their voice, right? Someone's speaking a lot differently when they're happy versus when they're like really mad. And so we also communicate our emotions within our voice. So that's another thing that we didn't dive more deeper into. So really today the focus was on how can you learn to recognize your emotions? And one way to do that, again, highly recommend, give to everyone who is sitting in front of me in my office, have your own emotion wheel, have your own mood meter, really start to even carry it around with you, put it on your refrigerator. I have one on my refrigerator because I'm like, when I look at it, it's a reminder of how am I feeling today? Did I tell people I was feeling good or fine? And when I did, was that even realistically close to what I'm feeling? No. Another thing that you can do is try to answer people more authentically to create a culture where we are actually talking about our feelings and using the vocabulary. I think that even within my family, sometimes I'll say, how are you feeling? And someone will say, fine, good. And I'll be like, no, that's not a feeling word. How are you feeling? And I think sometimes it's annoyed after that because I'm pressing, but it is really important to check in with people and understand how they're feeling, right? When someone says I'm doing good and they've just had a really bad day of one thing after another, or all they did all day was wash dishes and do chores and clean their home, like, are they really super excited or happy in that moment? Maybe, yeah, for some people, definitely. Like they just organized everything, feeling great, they're surrounded in a clean environment. But for other people, they're like, I'm bored, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. And so it's really helpful to actually emotionally check in and create that environment that when we are saying, how are you feeling? We're not doing it just because it's a norm. We are doing it because we're coming from a place of genuinely caring for somebody else. And learn what facial expressions you make when you feel a certain way. I think that can be really helpful. And it can be helpful to start to tune into other people with what facial expressions they make when they feel a certain way. And that's something that you learn over time. It's not quick, but just start to be more attuned to it. I know I did a improv class where we had to go through those 6 emotions that were listed earlier. And we had to face a mirror and they would give us the emotion anger, and they would tell us to express anger on a scale from 1 to 6. So they would say, okay, you're at a 1. So it was like, express your anger of what it looks like at a minimal level. And they would have us be looking at our face to see what our facial expression is doing that. And they would also have us talking to ourselves, so hearing the tone of our voice, and we had to escalate that up to a 6. And so that was a huge learning lesson even for myself of how I express anger. Anger is a really uncomfortable emotion for me to express, and I realized people won't be able to physically see that I'm angry, or even my tone of voice. My 6 is I'm completely shut off, and people might think I'm sad instead. And so people are not getting the message that I'm angry when I am. They're seeing me more sad. And so even being aware of how other people are perceiving you is helpful, right? If you're really angry and you're like, why don't they understand that I'm frustrated and that I'm angry or that I'm livid? Well, do that exercise with yourself and see how you portray anger to other people, because you might become very aware, I don't even see it. So how could I possibly expect them to be picking this up from me? And then how can you create an environment where people feel comfortable expressing their emotions? Operate with less authority and more humanity. I think that message is geared a lot towards people in positions of power. So if you even think about CEOs or leaders in your work environments, in order for someone to feel comfortable telling you that they're having a really bad day, or they just had a really bad interaction with a customer, so now they're down, and that's going to decrease their productivity level because they just got treated really poorly. In order for someone to feel comfortable approaching someone and having those conversations, or, you know, I'm in a horrible relationship, I'm experiencing relationship violence, so no, my focus is not here at work. You have to create a culture of humanity. Yeah, you have to demonstrate that you are willing to talk about feelings as well. You have to see someone who is sad or crying and not give them a tissue and say, come back when you're ready to have a conversation about this. You have to say, I can tell that this is really upsetting for you. How can I support you? And you can do all of that with having boundaries as well, right? Just because you see somebody crying doesn't mean you have to be the solution to their problem. All it means is you can validate what they are going through and still move forward with whatever you were about to say. So I'm kind of in my mind thinking about when someone's fired, right? If someone is fired, they might cry in front of you. They might be pissed because they think it's unjust, or that they're not getting what they deserve, or they deserve another opportunity that you didn't give them. It is okay to acknowledge, I see that you're really upset by this, or I see that this is really frustrating for you. That being said, you know, I'm still having to stick to my decision, and we are moving forward, letting you go. But then they at least feel slightly validated that you acknowledged what they are feeling and experiencing. And then, yes, you have to get comfortable with seeing people express their emotions and expressing your own. If you never express your emotions, or that you are having a good day, bad day, and these are the emotions you're experiencing behind that, then other people start to think that you're not really human, right? All humans experience emotions, or they just start to realize this isn't a place that we can be our emotional selves. And our emotional selves are present with us at any point in our life, at any single time. So this idea that we don't come to work, we don't come to class, we don't come to our relationships, our home environment with our emotional selves, that is impossible. We always have that with us. So again, it's so important to feel your feelings, go through them, don't try to suppress them, and acknowledge them. And so that is kind of just tip of the iceberg. And I know I went through it kind of fast, and it's not diving a little bit more deeper into it. So today, really the focus was on learning what the difference is between emotion, feeling, mood, and then talking about how you can start to recognize your own emotions and label them, so that you have control or power over you. You have control over them. And then starting to recognize nonverbals as well. And so I hope to talk more about feelings and emotions again, so that we can start to understand, okay, you're able to recognize them, label them. Now what? How do you move forward with that? How do you then start to understand them, so that, again, you can have more control over them in your life? And so I hope to kind of do like a 2.0 of this and move forward with this. I'm not sure exactly when that will be. Next week, definitely join me. The topic will be Understanding Trans 101. So we will be exploring what it means to be trans. And there are, of course, so many different ways to be trans, and they are all absolutely beautiful. But we will be breaking down some definitions there to kind of give a little bit of trans education 101. So if y'all have any questions, and again, if there's anything that you want to see presented on, definitely email me, and know that I'm absolutely here to support you. I am wishing y'all so much good luck on your finals. I know it's near the end of the semester. As a reminder, your self-worth is never attached to your productivity, and just know that you are absolutely wonderful wherever you are at in your life. Whatever emotions that you're feeling are completely valid, and acknowledge them so that you can have power over them. And I will talk to y'all later. Thank you.